there are a horrifying number of syphilis infections in Alberta. What is up, Alberta? And watch out, Saskatchewan. You keep rubbing up against that, you might get an infection in your regina.
Thousands of huge computers mining for Bitcoin.
This is the Clean Energy Show with Brian Stockton and James Whittingham.
Hello and welcome to episode 77 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
I'm James Whittingham. This week, Mazda enters the EV market. Sort of. And Ford doubles down on EVs. Sort of. Brian tries to kill James with more blood pressure raising news. And Tesla to produce robots that will kill us all. Explosive news about the Chevy Bolt EV, and Bitcoin mining comes to an abandoned gas well in Alberta, Canada, and then gets shut down. Brian Stockton, we're doing video this week. Hello, YouTube.
Yeah, hello, James. Yeah, how are you doing this week?
Good. We welcome your kind comments. I've been posting stuff on TikTok. Turns out TikTok is nasty.
Oh.
And I'm not even dancing. But if I get angry, I will start dancing in our Clean Energy Show TikTok videos.
I've been doing my part this last week. I've shown a lot more people my car, my Tesla Model 3. We've had relatives in town. I've gone to see other friends. So the pandemic is still raging, but, it's kind of the last gasp of summer, and it's fairly safe to be outdoors with people. So so I've shown my Tesla Model 3 off to a few more people. It's still the frunk that excites people the most because these are people that don't know really anything about EVs. So the frunk is still the main attraction.
The frunk is what gets them. For newbies, the frunk is because they don't need a combustion engine in the front of the car. There's lots of space. And they vary in size, but you open up the front hood and there is storage there, which, by the way, is particularly handy for the trucks, the pickup trucks that are coming out.
But I wanted to tell you a story about my Uncle Ralph, who was in town. My Uncle Ralph is around 93 years old.
Okay.
And he came up for a visit from California. And his son-in-law drives a Tesla in California. And I'm not sure which model. It's probably a Model 3 Performance or a Model S. I'm not sure, but it's one of those. So my Uncle Ralph went for a ride in his son-in-law's Tesla. And, they hit the accelerator, of course, as you do when you're showing somebody the car.
Oh, dear.
And
how old was he? 93?
He said that he lost his vision.
Okay. Well, we've established that I'm the equivalent of 93 years old because that pretty much happened to me. And that wasn't even the Performance. Right? That was an old Model S.
So I guess it's like what? Like the G-forces throw your head back and it sucks the blood away from your eyeballs?
He's
Is that what
probably
happens?
on low blood pressure pills, I'm guessing, and blood thinners, and the blood's just not getting to the brain if you're flying a fighter aircraft. That's why the elderly don't fly fighter aircraft, Brian.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yes, I am nervous, to hit the accelerator if there's elderly people in the car.
Or me. So just keep that in mind.
Yes, although, you haven't even gone for a ride in my car yet. I don't know if it's safe, but...
Well, I assume there's a plexiglass barrier installed.
Of course. Of course.
It was probably safe in the summer. Things are getting ugly around here again. We have the lowest vaccination rates in Canada in our neck of the woods. But I wanted to ask you something about your Tesla. Last week, you were talking about going from the lake to Winnipeg, and you stopped at the town of Moosomin for their fine dining. You want to describe that restaurant?
It's called the Cork and Bone. Shout out to the Cork and Bone. Anybody in the Moosomin area, check it out. It's a really nice little restaurant.
And you like to have lunch. I admire that about you. I respect that. I'm also a person who likes to have lunch.
Love it.
Not many meals I don't care for, but lunch is a good one. And here's the thing. I searched it out on Google Maps, and it said 437 kilometers from your cabin via Moosomin to Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And that is just exceeding the range of your car. Now, I'm not stupid enough to believe that the range of your car is going to last that on the highway, but I'm alarmed that you had to make 2 stops. Why wouldn't you just have to make 1 stop?
If we had taken the shorter route, like we had to take a longer route to go through Moosomin. So if we had not gone to Moosomin, it would have been only 1 stop in Brandon. I think that would have done it. And who knows, we could have maybe tested the limits of the car and still made it. But, we were in no hurry. So, Yeah, 2 stops is fine. We have no problem with that.
But that's you should only need 1 stop because it's 400. It's basically the range of your car. I wouldn't think that you would need 2 stops. Were the stops shorter?
Yeah, they weren't particularly long. Yeah, like the summertime highway range is probably like around 300 kilometers. So yeah, you're correct. 1 charge would have done it. I don't know. We didn't really think about it too much. It's just that's what we decided to do.
Okay.
Of course, the more stops you make, yeah, they're shorter. So, if we had done the 1 stop, it would have been more like, 45 minutes or something like that. And that's not always convenient either.
But you wanted to talk about Ford doubling down on their F-150 EV, the Lightning. They're doubling, what is it? They're doubling the production this week, they said, because of so much demand, and that's not even going to be good enough?
Well, yes, that's the thing. So they are doubling what they've said for production, but the numbers are absolutely measly. So 15,000 vehicles in 2022, 55,000 in 23, and 80,000 in 2024. Now, that's not, like 80,000, that's not nothing. But the problem is they sell 1 million Ford F-150 trucks.
It's the best-selling vehicle in North America is a pickup truck from Ford, the F-150, the entry-level full-size truck.
So by the time they get around to making 80,000 of these in a year, they'll have sold approximately 4 million of the gas-powered ones. And if these trucks start to get out into the wild and people start to experience them and they start to think, oh, I'm going to switch, I'm going to wait for the electric, there's not going to be enough of them. And then, they have a real danger of their sales of the gasoline ones plummeting.
Yeah, one of the reasons that it is the best-selling truck is because it's involved in fleets, it's involved in businesses, it's involved in contractors, private and large, small and big. And this is a big, because the trucks do use more, it'll be a bigger deal. Because it is the number 1 selling vehicle, it'll be a bigger deal to decarbonize it. And hopefully clean up. We got to work on cleaning up the power grid. Some serious stuff has to be happening very quickly. If you listened to our show last week on the UN Climate Report, Brian.
Yeah, and I'm a fan of Hyundai vehicles. I've owned Hyundais before. They've got an interesting new pickup called the Santa Cruz. It's just a gasoline pickup truck, but it's a small-sized pickup truck. It's sort of like Subaru kind of had something like that in the 80s maybe, or the 90s, where it's sort of more car-sized. It's 4 doors, and it's got kind of a small bed. It actually made me think about buying a pickup truck for the first time in my life. It's kind of cool looking.
Really?
But it's too, it's cool to me. Like I'm not a pickup truck guy, but I thought, oh, this looks interesting. It's the 2022 Hyundai Santa Cruz. It's got some interesting colors. It's got an interesting shape. I'm not going to buy it because it's gasoline powered and it's quite expensive, but I thought it was cool.
Ford is selling the base model of the truck for a very decent price. It doesn't have much range, but if you're a fleet, and you are you're just working within the city and you have a short distance to go, you can buy the smaller battery version and get into that. So I don't know. It's good. They're going to sell them like hotcakes because companies are going to want to greenify. They're going to say, hey. They're going to put big stickers that say electric truck for Joe's Plumbing, choose us.
But 80,000 units per year by 2024, like that is just not green enough.
It's not green enough, and it gets the buzzer. I have the buzzer standing by for all bad things, Brian. Listen, we had some feedback this week that we're going to get to in a few minutes. Lots of feedback this week, Brian. It's very unusual. Next week, we may be on a different day because my son is moving to university. You're starting teaching university, and you're no longer available on the normal day that we record the podcast. So we might adjust our schedule. You might have to go a few extra days before you get our next podcast, but it won't be too bad. Just chalk it up to summer plans like that. It'll be fine. And tell your friends because we're big in India. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Small in Australia, but big in India.
Yeah.
And even stranger that we're big in Australia or big in Saudi Arabia. We need to travel there and find out. We need to go to the streets and ask, do you listen to the Clean Energy Show and why?
Well, let's book a tour. We'll do a live tour.
Okay. Brian, I've got a pet peeve this week. You know what, Brian? I keep seeing news stories where they use file photos of electric cars, about electric cars, news stories about electric cars, and they're doing it and using the smallest, stupidest electric vehicles there are as an example of what an electric vehicle is. So the public thinks that electric vehicles are tiny. They're not the Humvee, which is coming out. Crazy big. Actually, it looks bigger than it is, but it's actually not quite as big as I think some of the other Hummers that have been out, gas Hummers. But that's my pet peeve. Keep seeing smart car EVs, which I don't even think they make anymore in North America or even Europe for that matter. They were tiny. Nobody likes smart cars. Smart cars were stupid because they use so much gas. You know, you could buy a full-size Prius for the same price. And the smart car is made by, is it BMW? Or Mercedes?
Mercedes. I think
Mercedes.
owns it, yeah.
So it's supposed to be a little luxurious, but you could buy a full-size Prius back then when those came out and have a lot more room, a bit more safety for the same gas, and get better gas mileage than the big car. They're not that efficient. I don't know if there's, the kick.
It's odd.
The TikTok
thought they
people
were
told
kind of
me that
interesting,
diesel was the way to go, 4-cylinder diesel. How stupid are you? And I went to think that the people on TikTok were smart. How stupid am I? My kids watch it all day. I keep hearing the dumbest things that they watch. I'm telling you, people, I'm going to dance on TikTok for the Clean Energy Show. And my kids literally told me that they would disown me. So lawyer up, kids. That's all I have to say. That's it for my pet peeve, but I want to go on to Bitcoin mining in Alberta because that's a story that is broken out today. There's been lots of talk about Bitcoin mining in Alberta, and it scares me, Brian, and I'll tell you why. It's because they needed something like 10 megawatt hours of power to generate 1.2 Bitcoins per day. So if you want to green that, you need 3 of the solar farms they're building near where we live in Saskatchewan, which are 3 megawatts. You need 3 of them. So 3 farmers' fields of solar panels to cover, which is doable, but to get 1.2 Bitcoins? I know Bitcoins are worth, $30,000 to $60,000. So it sounds like a little bit, and it depends how much Bitcoin changes hands, but it's very energy intensive. And there's rich people living nearby. They didn't like it. So here's what they were doing, Brian, before you go ahead. They were using an abandoned gas well, so they were calling it green because the gas well sitting there might emit methane. So they were going to use the gas well. And if you burn natural gas for electricity, you need basically turbines spinning. Like, small jet engines, let's call it. And the rich people nearby were not happy for the last year, couldn't sleep, and now it's getting shut down. The one thing that they've proposed for Bitcoin mining, and I don't want it to wreck the planet, if Bitcoin mining takes off and we don't cover that, people talk about covering electric cars with green energy, the expansion of electric cars. What about Bitcoin mining? That seems completely unnecessary. I know everybody listening, 90% of the people listening are pro-Bitcoin, but you can't get into it without covering it with green electricity, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly, I wouldn't get into it unless it was green electricity, but, who am I? I'm a guy with a podcast.
You're a guy with a podcast, a simple man. So Link Global, based in Vancouver, had set up 4 1.25 megawatt hour gas generators at the site, pulling power from a dormant natural gas well, and thousands of computer servers that were running. There is an interesting concept here that you can do with Bitcoin mining that no one's done yet, as far as I know. Tell us otherwise. cleanenergyshow@gmail.com if you want. I think that it's a good idea that you would take the waste heat from the computers. If you've had a computer running at full capacity, damn well it's like a furnace. It's blowing to keep the processor cool. Is blowing the heat off of that with room temperature air. So you could take that air and heat a greenhouse and get into local agriculture. But you have to organize that. You have to make a massive Bitcoin farm and then propose the greenhouse for next door. That's the only way you can do it.
Yeah. And hopefully run your Bitcoin farm off clean energy. And then, you use the waste heat. There's certainly examples of, office buildings that have been built with super high insulation that are just heated by the computers that are used. There are offices just heated by the ambient heat from the computers.
Yeah. And that's why doesn't Google and Facebook have servers in like Nordic countries near the Arctic?
Yeah, that sounds right.
And yeah, just because you can take cooler ambient air and be more efficient with it. So I have a new segment to introduce this week, Brian. Stand by. It's called... What do you think? No, it's called What Did James Learn? So every week I learn something. Not every week, but most weeks I learn something. I learned this week, in the previous shows I've talked about being triangulated between an oil refinery and a heavy oil refinery, refining dirty oil from Alberta, and a steel mill. And we've talked a lot about green steel lately. Green steel is important because 8% of the greenhouse gases in the world comes from manufacturing steel. That is a lot, and it's also kind of hard to get rid of. You can't always just use electricity. So what the federal government in Canada gave money to a steel mill, Algoma Steel in Ontario, and got them to convert to electric arc furnaces. Now, we have a company called Evraz from Germany operating a steel mill in Regina, call it 2 miles from me. I can smell it. I can hear it. And it's run, to my surprise, on 2 electric arc furnaces. They already had electric arc furnaces. Maybe what they do, they're making pipelines, ironically. But they have electric arc furnaces, so they have the capability of using clean electricity. Now, our grid here in Saskatchewan is 45% gross, bad, coal, bad. Fossil fuels, and it's 45% coal. And hardly any green electricity. They're trying to ramp it up. But I mean, a company like Evraz, what they did in Colorado, I mentioned this a million shows ago. In Colorado, they actually put up a solar farm by the steel mill there. And I was telling you that wouldn't that be great if they did that here? I would be so happy because there'd be less stink and less bad things happening. But they already using electricity.
At the time, not knowing at the time that they already had electric furnaces.
So they could do that, and maybe they will. The only thing, there's federal government incentives. We're in the middle of an election campaign here, so who knows what's going to happen. But it's a weird election, isn't it? The Conservative Party is outdoing the left-wing parties in left-wing ideas, and I don't know what up is down, left is right. Nothing makes sense anymore. And no one really believes that they're going to do that, but they're trying to win over our very leftist country who has 75% of its population vaccinated. So that's pretty good.
But once they start getting inquiries or requests, or once it becomes clear that the world wants green steel, then probably they'll do something about this.
Well, they do want green steel, and it's, just like they want electric pickup trucks. Companies want to show their green, not only to consumers, but to their investors, because people are divesting and putting pressure on companies, which is great. And that is really moving the needle on things.
Yeah, and they're also following government regulations. Every country has certain carbon regulations. So, it's all heading on a green path.
So, Brian, you wanted to talk about the Mazda new EV, and that, by the way, is our EV of the week.
So first off, a little pronunciation lesson. I noticed you said Mazda, and Mazda is the official Canadian pronunciation. But elsewhere in the world, it's Mazda. But when you watch a TV commercial in Canada, they call it Mazda. So don't complain if you think we're saying it wrong. That's the Canadian way. But we've they've been a laggard in switching over to EVs.
As all the Japanese companies have for some reason.
Yeah, for some reason. And they are finally going to enter the U.S. market. This is a car I believe that they had sold already in China. But it's got a 100-mile range, 160 kilometers. And it gets the buzzer. It's really a weak effort. It's kind of inexpensive. $33,000 US for the base model, $36,000 US dollars. And, in the US, they'll get that tax credit and get it lower than that. But this is a city car. This is basically like your old Nissan Leaf that you drive.
I know. And my Nissan Leaf is 1 million years old. It's 2013. In EV years, it's epochs ago that it was made. And that's what they're doing still. I love my EV, but I can't take it on the highway. I wish I could. Still looking for an EV to replace in a few months from now. Still don't have. Brian, we have a Prius that I need to upgrade. Just as a brief diversion here, I rode by the Toyota dealership there that we have in town, and the lot was empty. They can't. They shut down their factory in Japan recently because of this chip shortage that's affecting everyone, including Tesla. Although they say they have a workaround. But it's pretty dire, and we should probably talk about that in a future episode, how the auto industry is. When they come back, when the dust settles on the chip shortage, it might be too late for the combustion vehicle a couple of years from now, because they're talking a couple of years before this gets sorted out because of the pandemic. But
also demand is dropping for gasoline vehicles. So if they do have to shut down for a little while, it's maybe appropriate because the demand is lower.
So this is their first attempt at an electric vehicle. It's a quirky small SUV with RX-8 style doors. And it's the MX-30 is slated to go on sale. Here's another thing that gets the buzzer. It goes on sale in California. And guess where else in the United States? Nowhere. Nowhere. And in Canada, our Californian provinces are Quebec and BC, because they have ZEV standards for their cars. Yep. And that's it. Screw you, Mazda. Screw you, Japan automakers. Come on, people. You're all going to go bankrupt. And people, they laugh at me when I say Toyota could go bankrupt. Look at their lot. How many people can even be working there if they can't sell anything? It's crazy. It's just... And
we're not even at the story that's supposed to raise your blood pressure and kill you.
Yeah, but you're going to have to watch that on the podcast. Get the podcast wherever you listen to fine audio YouTube audience.
I use Overcast. Excellent podcast app.
Good recommendation from Mr. Stockton, an avid podcast listener and podcaster himself. So stay tuned. We'll be having more of the show right after this. You can reach us at the Clean Energy Show on Twitter, Clean Energy Pod, by email, cleanenergyshow@gmail, and by voicemail on our voicemail feedback page, speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow. Please check out our YouTube channel for videos of this show, episode archives, and special content. And, don't forget to subscribe, or we will find you. We know where all of you are. So glad those greasy YouTube people are gone. Brian, I can't. I have no. I'm getting bad comments there too. Somebody sent me a Bible verse on there as a response to my Greta Thunberg documentary review. Boy, there's a lot of bad comments on that. It set off a lot of people, and maybe some week I'll read the Bible verse on the show to see if it correlates to climate change. Sure. It was Peter something. So coming up later, we have the Lighty Rod. We'll clean up all the extra headlines. And what do you have for this week, Brian?
So are you ready to have your blood pressure raised?
Well, Mazda already got it up, so this will probably kill me, but go ahead. What do you got?
Okay. Big Oil coined carbon footprints to blame us for their greed. This is a story from The Guardian, and this is about how, so we all use the term carbon footprint because as a way to kind of measure how much carbon we use. And we all have a carbon footprint of some kind. And if you've got solar panels on your roof, then, you have a lower carbon footprint. So it turns out that British Petroleum is to blame for this term. They hired the public relations firm Ogilvy and Mather to promote the slant that climate change is not the fault of an oil giant, but that of individuals. It's here that BP first promoted and soon successfully popularized the term carbon footprint in the early aughts. The company unveiled its carbon footprint calculator in 2004, so one could assess how their normal daily life, going to work, buying food, and traveling, is largely responsible for heating the globe. James, are you still alive?
This is why gun ownership is not allowed in Canada. As I get older, Brian, you're not going to be able to read me these stories. I'm just going to die right in the show, and I'm useless if I'm dead.
Well, imagine the ratings, though.
Ratings will be terrific. The off-gassing and carbon pollution and methane will be terrible. I can't believe those bastards. And God knows what they're up to now, with their greenwashing. I'm very suspicious of Suncor putting up EV chargers which, are they reliable, the Suncor EV chargers? I mean, the co-op ones are more reliable. They're broken half the time at Suncor. Is that a coincidence? There's only 10 people using them.
Yeah, I don't know. Tesla definitely has the most reliable chargers. Everything else seems a bit of a mixed bag.
Brian, there was a person on our local Tesla group on Facebook the other day. No, it was electric vehicle group that bought a Kona EV and didn't realize that they got less mileage on the highway. And it's too bad that I'm guessing the dealership knew nothing. And they made the mistake of not researching. It's too bad that you have to do some research and relearn a few things, but there is a few things about electric cars that you need to know. They're the opposite of gas cars when it comes to fuel efficiency on the highway. They use more on the highway and less in the city. There's lots of reasons for that. They use more in the winter because the battery gets cold and because you need to use the battery for cabin heating, which is a big demand. And there's other reasons too, because gas cars are less efficient in the winter as well, but it makes a bigger difference when you have less range. So I hate to see somebody buying a new car and not realizing what the demands are. So if you're listening, and I know a lot of people who listen to the show are EV curious and they're not actually EV owners yet. If you live in a cold country like Canada, my suggestion is always to buy twice what you think you need, because you can lose a tremendous amount of range in the wintertime. And if you're on the highway, it's even worse. But if you have more range than you need, then you'll never think about it. And why should you think about it? You never want to think about it if you don't have to.
Yeah, the problem is long range is still kind of expensive. And there's also not enough chargers. So I think, eventually we'll need less range in our electric cars because there'll just be chargers everywhere. But now, for me, it's like I've had mine for a year and a half, and it's definitely a learning curve. But I feel like I kind of have it sorted now. Like I know what's possible in the car after a year and a half, having driven in the winter and the summer and so forth.
I think 5 years from now, 7 years from now, towards the end of the decade, the batteries will be cheaper, more dense, and bigger. And if there's demand for it, then they'll make them. If people don't want big batteries, they won't make them. But and then you won't have to worry about it. And hopefully that pans out with the price decreasing on lithium batteries. But they can't make enough lithium batteries, obviously. I don't know that they're ever going to be through a bottleneck, because there's, grids are going to want them as we ramp up, because we have to ramp up now for decarbonizing the planet. And I don't know.
Whoever can make a battery in the next 10 years, you will be able to sell it.
All right, let's get to our feedback. Don on Twitter pointed out the crazy big wind turbine that they're building in China that has 6 soccer fields of swept area. 6 soccer fields, or as we say in the rest of the world, football fields of swept area. 6 of them.
For
one is bad.
Turbine?
One turbine has a sweeping area of 6 soccer fields, football fields. Wow. 6. That's... Yeah, so Mingyang Smart Energy has announced details of a wind turbine prototype that it plans to install in 2023. It is now and will be the world's largest wind turbine. We've talked about the previous one before on the show. It is a 16 megawatts, which is the equivalent of the other one, but it's also being able to be ramped up to 17, so they can have that king of the giant wind turbine label. So 264 meters tall, a rotor diameter of 242 meters, and a blade length of 100 meters. Yeah, so you basically have to, it takes up an area of 6 football fields. The blades don't span quite that long, but don't go near that. Stay away from that 6 football field area. 16 megawatts, Brian. That's one turbine. They're building our first massive solar farm in Saskatchewan, our first solar farm. It's not massive, but it's a farm. It's utility scale, and it's 10 megawatts. And then one bloody splitting blade can do 17 if they ramp it up that. And that is a lot. That one wind turbine can power 20,000 households. 20,000 households with one wind turbine. It's hard not to, especially offshore, and because these things are more of a base load offshore. They're always blowing. It's hard to argue against wind. I mean, that is pretty impressive. And yeah, it takes carbon to make these suckers. Nothing is free. But yeah. And also, we had a nice message from Bob Armstrong again, who sent us a picture of getting his vehicle serviced in Calgary at the Tesla dealership there while listening to our podcast. So he had a picture of our podcast playing on the screen. He says it's a busy place with lots of people checking out EVs. Thanks, Bob. We appreciate that a lot. And certainly listening to the show is always great to see. Wouldn't it be cool if we could see everyone listening to our show, if they all sent in pictures? Whatever they were doing in the bathtub with candles. I don't care. So, yeah, I had another email here. Said, hey, guys, which of your episodes do you discuss the nuclear reactors? I have someone who thinks that that's the most efficient, cost-effective, and sustainable power generators there are is small modular nuclear reactors, I think is what he's talking about. Says, I know you guys talked about it a bit, but I can't remember when. Neither can I. I'm sorry, Joe. Also, do you have any suggestions of another podcast that discusses the small reactor viz, wind, and solar? No, but if I do, I will let you know.
Or if anyone else knows,
I'll just
send us a message.
Yeah, send us a message. I'll give you, Clean Energy Pod on TikTok is a good way to get a hold of us. If you're under 30. I don't understand TikTok, Brian. I don't. You're a media studies professor. I expect answers from you eventually, okay?
And yet we're going to be famous on TikTok one day.
We'll be famous on TikTok for sure. It's already doing way better than our YouTube channel for some reason. It's the algorithm. The algorithm really works well. Do you have any suggestions with other podcasts? So I don't, but when I listen to one, I will be sure to post it on our Twitter account, Clean Energy Pod. He also said, this guy that Joe knows, is sun and wind cannot generate enough for our needs. That's not true.
Not true.
That is, solar alone, plus storage, of course, would take up 0.3% of landmass, usable landmass right now, 0.3%. Basically, if you stuck a postage stamp on the United States map, that could power the entire world by solar. Now, Brian and I have solar on our houses. We have for a few years now. And by the way, I've had a terrible August, haven't you? It's just
not good for solar.
Smoke. This is kind of a weird aside, but smoke from global warming, forest fires could reduce solar. They might have to rewrite the predictions for what a certain region generates because it's ugly. I mean, so the smoke doesn't kill solar, but it certainly reduces it. Just like the clouds don't completely kill solar. And that's just something we know. We know it works in cold weather. We know it works in the winter. We know it works in the summer. We know it works even on cloudy days. I often get 40% of my solar on a cloudy day here. So now sometimes it's darker where we live and it's 20%, 25%, but you still get some solar. So that's just plain wrong. You know what's happening here, Brian? What I think, this is my theory. You know how people about the coronavirus or everything else, they don't want the normal things to fix it. there's been so many people who want to go outside that. They don't want the normal thing. They want to say, well, this other new thing that's not really there yet is going to work. And I have a lot to say about small modular nuclear because our government is possibly funding it. And our conservative governments in Canada are touting it. And we know damn well that it's a way to just put off acting on carbon emissions, just to put it off, because none of these things are ready to go yet. The first one is maybe going. Right now, I have some information on this. I don't want to get too crazy here, Joe, but I do have some information on this. Right now, the cheapest solar in the world, like say a place like Saudi Arabia, which by the way does have a lot of solar, one of the highest in the world, it's like half of what SMRs will cost now. So they have to get SMRs down in price by mass producing it. They think they can find efficiencies. It's not proven. That would take at least 20 years. We do not have 20 years to do this. We don't have 20 years. It has to be right freaking now. We can't wait for the hope of SMRs to happen in 20 years. They're talking about using it for mining, and the local indigenous communities in Canada don't want them nearby. Because you can use solar and wind for mining as well, and throw in a diesel backup for now, because you want to get rid of all diesel and everything like that. But there might be some uses for it for desalination or something like that. But basically, nuclear is not that cheap. It's not. Solar and wind are not. They're coming down. They're expected to be at least half as much at 2030 as they are now. So it will have to compete not only with what they are now, and you can argue about that because there are different costs in different regions, but the solar is expected to be half of what it is now in 2030. And, all the times that they've predicted things, it's always exceeded it. So I expect it to be a third or a quarter of what it is now.
Anytime you have to predict, 5 years out in the future, there's a good chance it'll actually be 6 years, 7 years, 10 years, who knows?
So in order to mass produce them, they have to have mass orders. They don't have mass orders. There's a lot of different countries that want to make them and get in on this game, and you can't have a lot of people doing that. You need one manufacturer fixing the planet and making as many of them in a factory as you can and having them assembled. I'm not against the idea. I'm just not convinced they're anything but a boondoggle, that they're anything that isn't going to take, like just the permitting process for safety still takes time. They say they're safer, but it still takes a lot of time. And we don't have that time. And that's just to get the first few off the line. And by the time this ever got up the scale, it would probably be too late. It would be way too many decades into the future. So, and I've seen some people studying this, and the levelized cost, and they don't always talk about the cost of disposing the nuclear waste. They just talk about what it costs to put the thing up. If you are pro SMR and excited about that, or you have a friend that is, tell them to make sure that when they're looking at that cost, that you have to include all the costs, the permitting, the time that it takes to delay the projects for years. A nuclear plant is $60 million a year just for permitting, one full-size nuclear plant. So think about that, and think about the waste disposal and everything like that. It's a high cost, and I'm not convinced of it. We will get back to it, Joe, and cover it again in different times in the show when different studies come out and different things come up. But it would have to. The cost would have to decline by 95% to be competitive with wind and diesel hybrids at mines right now, because wind and diesel is very cheap apparently. So contact us on TwikTalk, Clean Energy Pod, Clean Energy Show at Gmail, speakpipe.com/Clean Energy Show.
Okay, so we wanted to cover General Motors. We talked about this last week, how they were doing a big recall for the batteries in the Chevy Bolt EV, and they've expanded the recall. So last week we said it was going to cost them $1 billion to recall all these bolts and replace the batteries, and turns out it's going to be $2 billion because they're going to recall absolutely all of them, even the newest ones that have just been released, the EUV, the 2022. They are all getting a recall with a battery replace at a cost of $2 billion.
Well, in a way, this is good news for a Bolt owner from a few years ago because you get a brand new battery. You don't have to worry
Brand
about
new battery with it sounds like a little better capacity. Yeah,
Is that right? A little better capacity, too.
I think so. Yeah.
That's pretty sweet. Now, it is a hassle. You have to take your car in, but really, that's cool.
And if it burns up.
This is a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. It's a bad thing overall, but I actually know some Bolt owners that have got them early on, and they'll be getting a new battery. That's bad for GM, bad for the adoption of EVs, but good for some people that we know.
And it's also inconvenient if it bursts into flames while you're sitting.
Yeah, it is
inside
inconvenient. I think it'd be, unless you had a bag of marshmallows nearby. So we haven't talked about the Tesla robots. The Tesla AI Day. The big surprise at the end was I could not believe this. Like, I missed AI Day. I forgot about it, and I looked at it just as it was ending, and it's like, I could not believe it. There's some things that I cannot believe these days that I just wonder if I've gone mad. They're making a Tesla humanoid robot.
Yeah, well, a lot of the presentation was about their artificial intelligence to do with driving the cars. So it was an update on how that's progressing. And then the robot thing was sort of the bonus surprise thing at the end. But the thing to remember, the whole thing was a recruiting event. Yeah. They need to hire more people to solve these problems. And some of them are just to solve the self-driving problem. But now a whole new, huge, like a humanoid robot is a much more difficult problem than a self-driving car. And so they're going to need,
if you can't get along,
people who work in AI, who work in robotics to solve it. And the interesting thing to me is we know that Tesla doesn't do anything on a small scale. Musk doesn't do anything on a small scale. There are robots already on the market that you can buy. They're not necessarily too intelligent, but Boston Dynamics sells robots. But if Tesla's getting into it, it's going to be mass production. Like, they're going to make millions of these. If this was a movie, that presentation AI Day would be the inciting event, and either it's going to lead to our ruin and robots will take over the earth and kill us all, or we'll have this wonderful George Jetson future where robots will be walking around and serving us and doing us our bidding. But yeah, AI Day, that was the inciting event for sure, like in a movie.
Here's the thing, Brian Stockton. I don't understand why he wants to do this.
Well, yeah, because they've learned so much about artificial intelligence. They have arguably the lead in kind of understanding, navigating the real world through AI, through their car program. So, this is the next logical step. And they even have the beginnings of the hardware because, as they showed on the slide, the idea is basically to put in the same hardware computer that's in the cars into the robot. So they already have the computer. They've announced hardware for, like, the next update to the car computer coming out about a year from now. It'll be even more powerful. So, yeah, it really makes sense to me because they're already part of the way there. And, Musk is all about solving big problems. And, it's a potential massive, massive industry. It's an industry that could be bigger than the car company for sure. And he can make robots and take them to Mars. Like, he could put 1,000 robots in one of those rockets that he wants to take to Mars. And, maybe robots can help set up the colonies on Mars.
Maybe robots will take over Mars. Maybe I don't want to be the sucker up there who's humanoid for real and gets eaten by the robots. Musk has been warning about AI and the dangers of AI for years, even though he's pursuing it. And I'm thinking, okay, well, computers, little boxes can take over the world. They can adjust gates. They can do things. And that's how I'm imagining his fear of AI. But now he's putting the damn thing in robots, which can walk up to you and break your neck or do whatever they want to you. I'm not for this.
Well, would you rather have Mark Zuckerberg doing it?
No. I assumed he was a robot. I don't know. Screw you, Mark Zuckerberg.
Well, the reason he probably warned about it, because he started talking about that 3 or 4 years ago, he's probably been percolating on that in his brain since then, starting to think a few years ago about doing a humanoid robot, and then was starting to think about the consequences of doing that. And that's when he started to talk about it. And he has said publicly that there should be some type of oversight, government oversight, some kind of regulations or rules to monitor this stuff so it doesn't go the bad way. The robot stuff isn't necessarily related to clean energy, but it could help Tesla's mission. The other stuff, the self-driving car stuff, they covered a lot of area there. And as we've discussed before, like self-driving cars in themselves could be a huge boon for clean energy because we'll need fewer vehicles. So yeah, there was lots more information about self-driving cars in the presentation and how their software works. The one that interested me the most, because I'm a filmmaker and a film professor, was the notion of working with the cameras. I've always kind of wondered how that works. So Tesla's moved to pure vision for their self-driving software, but they have to use these kind of imperfect cameras to do it. They're kind of like little cell phone cameras. But, you know, just like when you make a movie, like if you make a Toy Story movie where it's a CGI movie, they make a camera model, like they make a virtual model of a camera and virtual model of lenses. And, you know, they use that to kind of render a realistic image that's similar to how a camera would render an image, you know, even though it's a virtual kind of Toy Story world. So, yeah, so I've got a clip here. It's from the Dr. Know-It-All YouTube channel. He's a guy that is a professor at the University of Georgia, and he actually teaches in the theater and film department and has expertise in, you know, CGI and computers and stuff, but also artificial intelligence expertise and a degree in that. So here's a clip here from, it's partly AI Day, it's partly Dr. Know-It-All, talking about how they use the cameras and, you know, reproduce images and work with the cameras to train the computers.
So part of this is that it's very, very important to reproduce what the camera sees. So you have to have an extremely good model of the physical camera in software, and you have to be able to tweak the parameters to your heart's content.
Again, the point of the simulation is not to just produce pretty pictures. It needs to produce what the camera in the car would see and other sensors would see. So here, we are stepping through different exposure settings of the real camera on the left side and the simulation on the right side. We're able to pretty much match what the real cameras do. In order to do this, we had to model a lot of the properties of the camera in our sensor simulation, starting from sensor noise, motion blur, optical distortions.
So from this, you can see that they're basically recreating the camera as accurately as possible, using real camera values to train the virtual camera in software.
So what they've talked about, I think revealing it for the first time in the presentation, is that in addition to all the data from the cameras, like they collect video from all the Teslas that are on the road, they're also making CGI simulations and using that to train the network. So for weird cases like in the presentation, like a moose walking across the road, they may not have video of that from one of their cars, but it could happen, right? So they make these CGI simulations that are like Toy Story. They were super realistic. After you look for a little bit, you could tell that they were kind of fake. But the most interesting thing to me in that clip where when they do these simulations, they have to kind of reproduce basically the crappiness of the cameras. And that was the thing I've always wondered about. And when I drive around in my car, you know, the sunlight, if it's low in the sky, it'll hit the camera and, you know, flare out. But they're taking all that into account when they're training the neural network. And so when they do these simulations, they overexpose it, they underexpose it, they make it crappy. And it's even though it's virtual and could be perfect because they're making a simulation, they make it crappy, and that's the better way to train the camera.
Well, that's interesting because the other guys, the Waymo, the competition, who's not using camera vision, they are training their computers with. They talked about putting an elephant in the middle of the highway. They can do whatever they want with computer simulation, and they're bragging about how that was going to get them to the finish line first. It's interesting that Tesla is now doing that, but at the same time, you'd have to think that the Teslas are encountering things that they have never even thought of at those other companies. They have to be conceived.
And the other clip I want to play here has to do with sort of the failure moments. So Tesla knows when somebody disengages the autopilot, they know that something has gone wrong, and they get these data points. So what they can do is take that disengagement from somebody's car that was really driving around, and then they can create a virtual environment and then make adjustments in different scenarios. So let's play the other clip.
Basically, what he's saying is Tesla can take any failure moment, they can capture all the details from it, they can recast it into a similar synthetic environment, and then they can make all sorts of adjustments to it so the computer can train on that type of scenario over and over and over again. In other words, it's not the same video sequence each time, right? Which would get boring because it would get good at that. It would overfit to that data, but you can create thousands of very, very similar scenes by just moving a traffic cone or where a person is or you know, where a tree is or something like that. So you can create all of that in simulation. So out of one data point where the car failed to do the correct thing, you can create tens of thousands of simulated scenes that are basically the same thing, but they're all slightly different.
So yeah, I just thought that was amazing, like the way that they are training the network.
How do you feel after watching it about your confidence in full self-driving?
Well, my confidence slipped a bit. Like I really did think, you know, we'd be maybe getting the beta up here in Canada by the end of the summer. And, you know, these presentations, there's always a caveat. And because it's a recruiting thing, it always kind of makes you wonder, like, wait a minute, this is a recruiting event. Does that mean it's not really solved yet? And, you know, that is definitely part of it. So yeah, it's you start to understand the enormity of the problem after watching AI Day. And that makes me think, oh, this is going to move slower than I thought.
The Clean Energy Show Lightning Round.
Well, this is where we clean up the headlines and close out the show with everything that we've missed this week. We'll briefly go over a few things. The city of Kelowna, BC, is considering EV charging requirements in bylaw update. Last year, Burnaby, Nelson, and Sainish, I don't know how to say that. Do you? S-A-A? No. Okay. The town starting with S, all made it mandatory for developers to install level 2 charging infrastructure in new developments. Level 2 is the type of charging that you have at home, the type of Brian and I have. Charges in, say, 25 kilometers per hour up until about 80 at the high end of what you can install. And since people charge overnight, that's all you really need at home. Yeah, I wish they would do that here. And I think it's stupid that they're not doing it everywhere, because the assumption, if you're not doing it everywhere at all cities, is that EVs are not going to be taking over in a few years. You're assuming wrong, because they are going to be taking over. So you should be mandating this. It's going to be a big pain in the ass for people. And if you're a developer, you certainly should be doing it, because you're going to have, if you're making condos, people with electric cars are going to be looking for condos with electric charging, and it's going to be an advantage to you. You have any thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, it just makes sense. We need all the regulations to support this for sure.
So Musk has teased massive improvements for the coming full self-driving beta 9.3, but he was dissing 9.2. That's kind of surprising to me.
Yeah, at least the releases are coming out fairly regularly now. Like within a couple of weeks, there's an update. So that bodes well.
This week in space news, 100,000 terminals have shipped from Starlink. Is that good? Is that about what you expected?
That sounds pretty good. They're still working on building another plant to make them.
Oh.
You know, it's again, like, you know, like Tesla, it's a manufacturing problem. These are mass market items, and they can't make them fast enough. So I'm sure they could. There's a big waiting list now in certain, you know, if you want to order a Starlink satellite dish, it's going to be a while.
Stanford University, United States, is the first university in that country to go 100% solar. And you know, 100% renewable. It's actually 100% solar. That surprises me. I thought the leading universities in the world would be going to renewable by now, because they're big and they got lots of money, and why not? But that's taken this long.
We should be doing that at our own university. There's lots of roof space. We should have solar on all the buildings, but so far we don't.
California is requiring all new homes to be built with solar panels, which we've talked about before. But I didn't know that they've required every bus to be bought as zero emissions now, which is good. Zero emission bus is good. Can't wait to get one here. My son, going to university, will be riding the bus for the first time in his life. And up in Saskatoon, where he's going, they do have hybrid buses, and they are getting some battery electric buses.
Right, but what about his Honda Civic?
Well, he'll be driving that to Saskatoon and parking the piece of rust on the street. So,
Okay. That's probably why.
The Whittingham family does not have the kind of cash it takes to park at a university, Brian Stockton. There's no way in hell. I'm still paying off parking tickets for my degree 30 years ago. So, yeah, it's an ugly business. I had to go work for the food bank. This guy who looked like John Voight was my guy. He looked like he just got out of jail and was willing to kill somebody for $1. I had to drive around in a white van dumping off giant flour bags full of Dale donuts, and I was starving, and I so wanted to eat one, but I didn't want to be killed by this guy because he was by the book.
And this was to pay off your parking tickets.
This was to pay off my parking tickets.
Wow.
At university. A Norwegian company, this is hot off the press. I can barely touch it. A Norwegian company called Yara International claims to have created the world's first zero-emission ship that can also transport cargo autonomously. So we have humanoids walking around, killing us, and we have ships that are traveling around autonomously. What a world. The Yara Birkeland electric cargo ship was first conceptualized in 2017, but now it looks to make its first voyage with no crew members on board later this year in Norway. It is powered by a whole bunch of electricity, a whole bunch, just a crap load. Many electric cars worth, let's put it that way. Listen, a wood alternative from kombucha wins the U.S. James Tyson Award. I think that's, what do you make of that?
Yes, kombucha.
Kombucha. The winner of the 2021 Dyson Award, not to be associated with the vacuum, I assume, the 21-year-old named Gabe Tavis, who's going to be a very rich person when he grows up. His mission is focused, make wood without cutting down trees. So he invented Pyrus, a petroleum-free wood-like material that's sustainably produced with repurposed bacterial cellulose waste from kombucha, which is what? So something you eat in your
like
salad?
a fermented tea. It's a fermented tea.
Okay. And finally this week, Siemens says that it will produce 1 million more EV chargers in the United States in the next 4 years. Good to see. And not enough chargers. But where we live, we're getting one in Martinsville, which is kind of a bedroom community. We're getting one in Estevan, which is a small city in the middle of nowhere in oil country. I feel fairly optimistic about the EV chargers around here going up. I mean, it's not that hard to put one up, It's not that invasive to put an EV charger.
Yeah, it's not like a small modular nuclear reactor, that's for sure.
Well, that's our time for this week. Check out our YouTube channel if you want to see our horrible-looking faces. And we have the first part of the show
for
up
yourself.
there. Speak for myself, yes. I will be the android James will be taking over the show in a few weeks. And very good-looking man, that guy. He will kill you, though. So Tesla will build him, and he will host her show at 2030. See, the show can go past 2030, Brian. We keep talking about stopping at 2030.
Okay, we'll just pass the show on to our robots. That's fantastic.
We'll see you again next week on the Clean Energy Show. I'm James Whittingham. Thanks for listening.
See you next week.